Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me tonight is Thomas Fusco, and he's got a new book out called Behind the Cosmic Veil. And from what I've studied in his email that he sent me with all the information and on his website, this deals a lot with where science, spirituality, religion, paranormal, supernatural, where it all meets, and it's really a unified field of everything for all of creation that this man has come up with. And as I understand it, he has found some confirmation in rare biblical scripture or old biblical scripture that I'm assuming, and I could be wrong, it's not part of the actual Canaan itself, and we can get him to clarify that in a minute. But this is really a subject that I've read a lot of articles about online, and I know a lot of people, pardon me folks, David Wilcox has actually got his own one that deals with consciousness, and I don't know if Thomas's is similar to that or not until we start talking, but there's other ones as well. So it's really a very fascinating subject, and it's one that me personally, I think I'd like to learn more about and I'd like to cover, because who doesn't want to know how reality works? Well, maybe there are some that don't, but I'm not on that list. So Thomas, how are you doing today?
Oh, very good. How about yourself?
Oh, I'm doing just great, Thompson. I want to thank you for coming on the air, and I also want to thank you for contacting me a second time when I didn't receive your first email. I have no idea what happened, but I would have never known you were out there if you hadn't contacted me again, so I want to thank you for that.
Well, thanks for having me on the show. And, yes, persistence is a salesman's virtue.
I'll give you that one. I spent 15 years in sales management and marketing, so it's required in all three if you're going to succeed.
There you go. You got it.
Now, usually as a rule of thumb, Thomas, I like to start the show out with asking my guests what it is that attracted their interest to the field that they're covering, to kind of let my listeners kind of get to know a little something about you.
Well, in terms of what we might look at as alternative disciplines to the mainstream, which encompasses these kinds of things like paranormal studies, alternative sciences, parapsychology, ufology, those types of things. I think I'm very similar with many other people in that I've had certain personal experiences and observations that indicated to me that there was something more to reality than what was described in the classical physics that I was taught in school. And while I don't talk about the specifics of those experiences on air anymore, anyone who's had any such experiences understands how that kind of begins to change your perception of the world around you. But for me, Royce, unlike a lot of folks that have, in having these experiences, they pursued what I would call more of an experiential development in their pursuits. What it did for me was it created for me a very compelling question. And so for me, that question was, what kind of universe would allow these kinds of things to happen that we call supernatural and paranormal? How could the physical universe be put together that would incorporate these kinds of observations, these kinds of events? So rather than going into a specific study or branch of study like parapsychology or paranormal or UFOs, and even within those fields themselves, we know, like in the paranormal, we have people that are specialists in EVPs or parapsychology, where some people specialize in remote viewing. What I wanted to do was look at the whole enchilada I wanted to look at the entire universe and say, okay, let's find a model that fits that. And then all of these other fields should be able to be at least accessible and recognizable as something that is consistent with the laws and principles by which the greater system is put together. So I've actually come into the study of the paranormal almost like from the back door or from the outside looking in. And it's given me kind of a unique perspective, and it's allowed me to escape some of the stumbling blocks that are caused by traditional thinking and, conventional beliefs in a particular branch.
Yeah, I think those particular beliefs can be big stumbling blocks, especially when you etch them into stone and don't leave room for them to be modified further down the road if need be.
Yeah, again, if we're talking about the paranormal, someone who is an expert, let's say, in EVPs, could discover some very interesting aspects of it. But what their discoveries are may not relate to something like an apparition or some of the other phenomena that are observed at these sites. And so while their model of EVPs may be very compelling, it doesn't accommodate all of the other phenomena that's being observed at these same sites of hauntings. So there is certainly an advantage of taking an overview, kind of looking at the forest from above rather than being, stuck with studying a particular species of tree in a specific location.
Okay. Now, since we are talking about paranormal phenomena, for the listeners' benefit, I think it would probably be a good idea for you to tell us what you think, in your opinion, because I've heard it vary from one person to the next, at least in Yahoo groups, if not a few other places, constitutes paranormal, and that it can also be uniformly applied to other scientific and quantum physical anomalies.
Yeah, Royce, it's a good point because, let's face it, at the heart of our understanding about the way the universe is put together is our discipline that we call science. And if we're going to really come up with a view of everything, with an all-encompassing concept of some sort, we can't continue to have this kind of a position where science and, paranormal or supernatural studies are at odds. So we have to find ways of reconciling them. And for me, I had to come up with, very early on in my work, with a definition of paranormal phenomenon that was not only very specific and very exacting, but also that was consistent with established physics. And so what I ultimately came up with is my definition of what is paranormal is any physical observation that has a physical effect and that interacts with its surroundings physically. For example, you can't hear a disembodied voice unless you actually have a physical interaction with that cause that's compressing airwaves that are vibrating your eardrums so that you hear a sound. These are physically observable effects that physically interact with their environments. Like normal phenomena, what makes them paranormal is that there is no locally positioned direct physical cause connected to the effect. So, for example, in a normal voice, we have this vibration of the air column, a compression wave that recorders or our eardrums pick up, translate into sound. In a normal voice, the local physically connected cause is our vocal cords. They are directly in contact with the air column that is vibrating. In a paranormal voice or disembodied voice, we have the effect, we have the vibration of the airwaves, we have our ears doing everything just like a normal voice, except that there's no local set of vocal cords. There is no physical, locally connected cause to the effect. And so this brings us into a scientific definition that is already existing. It's called non-local causality or non-locality. It is an effect with no local physical cause. Now, we observe a lot of things in science that also are mysterious because they're non-local effects. We see a lot of it in quantum physics. We still see this in the dual slit experiment, which we might talk about a little later. We also see it in certain aspects of gravity. So here we have a definition where we can combine a number of different elements from various disciplines under the same scientifically consistent, logical, and workable, functional definition.
Right. And, I mean, there's a lot of things that would, fall under this, and some of them are, readily admitted by science and other ones are not. Like, for example, free energy would not be admitted by science even though dark matter is.
Well, you've got a point there. even though with dark matter, there's a public persona, a public presentation from the scientific community as to what image they're projecting with that particular idea. But internally, they are fully aware that that concept is completely hypothetical, and they have no stitch of physical evidence for it. But free energy, yes, that's another aspect that has not been researched as well as it should be.
And as I understand it now, there have been tests run that have confirmed that there is no empty vacuum, that any area of space whatsoever does contain energy, but yet they're not willing to go into research and advance this theory. Is that correct?
In part. What we have is a theoretical idea, a theoretical construct, in that, how would I put this in a real good way that would also tie it together with other things? Let's think about Einstein, and let's think about his particular work and what he taught us about space that we didn't understand before. Under Isaac Newton and Newtonian physics, space was understood to be an empty vacuum, an empty void, just a nothingness that was occupied by physical content, atoms, molecules, matter and energy, but they occupied empty space and they moved through time. This was Newton's vision. Einstein taught us the reality of the substance of space. Einstein taught us that it is a continuous field that is defined by and characterized by 4 independent variables: height, width, depth, and time. That it is actually a substantial field, and that rather than being occupied by matter, it was the concentrations, the areas of higher density within that unified field that he called matter points. So basically what he was saying is that space and time is a continuum, and that matter is actually a continuation of the spatial field. It's just a highly concentrated location within the universal spatial field. Now, if this can give rise to matter, then we also have to understand it being a field, that it must have some base frequency. And with that base frequency, we would expect that every location in the universe would have some kind of a substance to it that could be tapped into. And this is the very broadest sense of zero-point energy. The problem is, from a physics point of view, is the challenge in actually finding a practical way to exploit that theoretical idea. And this is where the debate goes back and forth with. And I don't think that we're at a point yet where we can absolutely for certain demonstrate continuously and repeatedly and predictably some type of a mechanism and a theoretical model from which that mechanism is derived that absolutely demonstrates 100% of the time the ability to tap into the zero-point energy. Doesn't mean that it's there, that it isn't there. It just means that it hasn't been sufficiently compelling for the investment dollars that are required to be pumped into mainstream science in order to actually make the discoveries that are necessary in it.
Yeah, I've kind of had that impression before that a lot of what really makes it to the mainstream has to do with what's worth money.
You're without a doubt, Royce. I mean, if you just stop and think about it for a minute, you have these physicists and scientists. Very few of them are wealthy, that they have these large sums of money. All scientific research has to be funded by somebody or some organization. And all of these organizations, whether they be private industry or governmental bodies, they really are expecting some sort of a return on investment. So what they're going to go after is something that has a very prominent, how would I say it?
Highly marketable?
Yeah, not only that, but also a certain degree of established credibility for its theoretical foundation, that people believe that if they throw money at it, the percentage, the chance of them coming up with a tangible result is so high that they're going to go after it. It's just like in the medical field, there are certain diseases that are basically orphaned. They're abandoned because the drug companies can't justify pouring the money into it for what they perceive as being a very limited return.
Yeah, and that's pretty understandable. But it also shows that government and academia and who knows who else has a vested interest in discouraging research in fields that are less certain, at least in the public eye.
Yeah, or to put it in another way, that they're not going to support, they're not going to fund the kind of research that is going to yield results that doesn't give them a return on investment. Like what you're saying is free energy. How does an organization get a return on an investment for discovering free energy?
No, that would put the light company out.
Yeah, it's just like, I'm in the computer technology business, and I get people coming in for repairs and servicing and that type of thing. And one of the things that comes up from time to time is the idea of the Linux operating system. And I try to explain to them the problem why you can't find support for it, and there isn't a network established with it. It's the whole idea behind Linux is that it's free. So nobody's making money, so very few people are investing largely in Linux because there's no payoff. So physics and science works the very same way.
The same thing goes with a lot of these coding, like for PHP, you can get free scripts for websites all day long, but when you go to get support, the most you're going to get out of most of them is forum support, and even then it's a lot of guesswork.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. We live in a capitalistic world. I mean, even the communist countries and the socialist countries on some level, they have to resort back to capitalism in order to make it work. And so, it's the old story. If you want to know the answer behind anything, follow the money trail. And that will tell you lots of times what the underlying story is behind the headline.
Yeah, that's what Foster Gamble says on his website. Makes a lot of sense, too. Now, real quick, before we go too far and I forget, I want to let everybody listening know that your website's www.cosmicveil.com, and that's spelled with a V-E-I-L. COSMICVEIL.com. And if you go there, you can get links to his books. He's got articles there that explain a lot about his theories and his research and, other interesting things. I really recommend you go by and give it a visit. Also, anybody that wants to call in can call 832-632-7904. If I don't answer and you get voicemail, just hang up and call back, because I sometimes try to wait till I get a moment in a break in the conversation, and sometimes voicemail picks up before I do. So just be patient and bear with me. Now, getting back to the book at hand, wanted to also mention to you that your formula is partially based on geometric bending of space, combined with the materialization of extra-physical information within these bends, can explain the mechanics behind all the primary apparitions, disembodied voices, etc. It's a pretty long paragraph I'm looking at here, but to get to the nitty gritty of it, your geometric bending of space, you think covers the biggest majority of this? Can you tell us something about it?
Sure, absolutely. And really, what we want to do with this is actually stand back from any particular field of discipline like the paranormal, and first take a look at reality as a whole. And this is where my work differs from a lot of the other things that your audience may have been exposed to before. What I wanted to know is this. I wanted to come up with some fundamental way of understanding how the universe is put together, a fundamental way of expressing what the universe is that suddenly opens certain doors of understanding and breaks down traditional barriers between various disciplines. And what I ultimately came up with is this. To me, what I call the capstone of the pyramid, the actual key block that sits on the top, that all the other millions of blocks below fall into place beneath it, is that the definition of the universe is that it is an expression of materialized and materializing information. Now, one of the modern precepts of physics is that everything is built from information. We've actually come more towards this understanding of the universe the further we go on in the computer age. The idea that the universe is an expression of materialized information is actually such a part of physics today that they have made an extension to the old conservation laws. What I mean by that is that everybody's heard the conservation law that matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed. Today we have an extension of that, Royce, that's called quantum unitarity. And what that says is that information, the information from which matter and energy is built, that too can neither be created nor destroyed. And so this is a modern concept. The only difference is, first of all, is that out of all the different perspectives that you could have on the universe, to identify this particular aspect as the fundamental expression of a definition for reality. Now, once we come upon that, we only have two other things that we need to consider. We need to consider, number one, the source of that information, and number two, the mechanism by which that information materializes. This is really going to the most simple and fundamental, almost childlike, kindergarten way of looking at it, which, surprisingly enough, Einstein was in very much support of that kind of an idea. He said that a good physical theory is simple enough for a school child to understand it. He said if you get beyond that, he called it what he phrased as unnecessary complexity. He believed that the final solutions would be very, very simple.
And he's probably very right. I've had a lot of respect for him.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of my work really is a superphysical extension of Einsteinian's physical spatial field. It really actually emerges from this model, which is quite wonderful. So if we take a look at matter and energy and think about it in terms of order and structure, it's kind of easy to understand that that's kind of put together by information. If you think about the information, let's say you have a picture of a horse or something on your hard drive in your computer, and it's in the form of information, but it's not in a coherent form where we could actually see the horse, or even if we could read all the dots and dashes, the ones and zeros.
Kind of like in the old binary form rather than the new digital form.
Yeah, and we wouldn't even recognize it. I mean, we could open up a hard drive and look at the platter. We couldn't find the information, and even if we could see it, we wouldn't understand how to interpret it. But once we have the mechanism of the computer itself, we can feed that data, that information, through the processing of the computer, output it to a printer, and lo and behold, the printer puts out a materialized physical version of that information that we can see, we can copy, we can feel it, we can crumble it up, we can make a paper airplane out of it, we can burn it. You know, it's materialized. And so it's kind of simple to extend that idea to an understanding of all of physical reality is the same kind of materialization of information. The only thing that has been a challenge and that has never quite been understood before is how that information becomes material. What's the process by which form or which structure, and all what I'm saying, what's the process by which structure?
Right. And I have wondered how that works, especially when you're doing it with wireless.
Oh, there you go. Now, let's jump back and forth a little bit here. Let's go back to the paranormal. Think about an apparition for a moment. All right? What is an apparition? Well, if we think about it, let's talk about instances where apparitions are seen, Royce, that are so detailed that we actually have instances where people go back into old archives and find photos of persons who lived in that house before, and they take the photo and show it to the homeowner and say, is this the person you've seen? And the homeowner, the jaw drops to the floor and say, oh my God, that's who I've been seeing. Now, what that means is that the information which was captured in that photo, in that image, is the exact same information that's materializing in front of that person when they see the apparition. You follow what I mean?
Right.
So here we have an idea or a situation where in a paranormal phenomenon, we're looking at an expression of materialized information. We could think about a voice, a vocalization, as a collection of coherent information. Certainly, when we talk into a digital recorder, it converts it into a form of information that is later materialized through its speaker that we can actually hear the voice. So what we come up with then is the idea that we can apply that to the entire universe, that everything in the universe is an expression of materialized information, which means that what happens in a paranormal site, in a haunting, is not in itself unusual or abnormal. What is happening is a normal process that is occurring in an atypical or non-standard way. That rather than we have these materializations like planets or galaxies or that kind of thing, that are highly stable, that are persistent in their materialized form. In a haunted site, we're actually seeing a fluctuation, a passing in and out of this kind of a materializing process, but we're seeing it in front of our eyes occurring in real time.
Wow. Well, you know, while I'm sitting here listening to you, I'm thinking about books that I've read by physicists like Bernard Hayes and a few others, that they've described the fact that things really had to be observed before it becomes a particle or a wave, or before it decides, in order for it to decide to collapse. It's, I think if I understand correctly, a wave until somebody observes it, and then it decides to collapse into a particle. And that sounds almost like the information conversion you're talking about. Am I very far off?
Royce, you're right on. And although you may not have some of the precise details of it, that doesn't matter. The general gist of it, what you're saying is correct. You know, when you, like I was saying, imagine like a pyramid with 2 million stones in it, like the Great Pyramid of Giza. And every single stone gives you a different perspective when you stand there and look out onto the rest of the structure. But when you find the capstone and look at it from that perspective, everything else falls into place beneath it. So in all the different ways that we can observe reality, what I finally came to the conclusion is that capstone, that one way that we can look at reality that begins to tie everything together, is the idea that the universe is an expression of materialized and materializing information. And so when we see in quantum physics these kinds of states where things aren't quite absolutely predictable, whether they're not quite matter or energy, whether they're not quite a wave or a particle, my argument is that the reason why we see it that way is that it is in the very earliest processes of materialization, and that the dimensions of space and time are not sufficiently unfolded to give absolute hard coordinates for a spatial or a temporal number where we can actually say anything definite about it. Now, once reality begins to materially unfold sufficiently where we can get a definite coordinate of space and a definite coordinate of time, suddenly everything crystallizes and it takes on a normal form like it does in normal macro physical reality, and everything's perfectly predictable. We can tell exactly what position the Earth is going to be relative to the Sun and all the other planets 237 years and 43 hours and 22 minutes and 6 seconds from now. We'll know exactly, we can predict exactly where the Earth is going to be. That's because reality has become so fully materialized that the dimensions of space and time are unfolded sufficiently for us to determine exact coordinates.
My thought is the ancients must have known this, especially the Mayans, in order to do the kind of calendars they were doing.
Well, you know, that's very interesting, and that's a whole other field of discussion. And of course, you know, that taps into the, crosses into the kind of the ancient astronaut controversy.
Yeah, one of my favorite areas.
Now, I'm neither a proponent nor a detractor of the ancient astronaut theory. What I say is this, based on my understanding and based on my model of the universe, is that the idea that ancient astronauts were here and contributed in some way to these things that we observe from the ancient world is entirely feasible. It is entirely believable, and it would certainly serve to answer certain questions that mainstream archaeology has not been able to answer correctly. What we needed to make this thing something very real, to make this a very hard mainstream consideration, is a theoretical model that allows not only for the existence of these aliens, but describes a mechanism how these alien intelligences could actually reach our vicinity of space from remote locations without having to overcome the impossible obstacles of doing it within fully unfolded space-time. You know, that's when space-time is fully unfolded, this is where we run into the obstacles of speed of light. This is where we run into the obstacles of not being able to accelerate a mass to the speed of light because it requires infinite energy and the object takes on infinite mass, both which are physical impossibilities. My theory gives us a way by which we can transcend that. So such an alien intelligence can actually bypass space and time. The understanding of that science gives us the ability to technologically reproduce all the kinds of effects that we see at work in a haunted house. Because think about it. If the phenomena of hauntings, what we see in a haunted house, Royce, are physically observable, that means that they must be behaving according to the laws and principles from which the universe is assembled. They can't be working in a way that's contrary or outside of what those physical laws and principles are. We're still in the process of discovering those laws and principles. However, once we discover them, and we were able then to build technology based on those principles. What do we see in haunted houses? We see materializations, dematerializations, teleportations. We see anti-gravity. We see levitation. You know, we see large, reports like large things like televisions and refrigerators picking up and moving of themselves, even flying across the room with no local measurable means of conventional propulsion.
And I mean, what you're talking about, these refrigerators, this is happening in front of police officers who testify to it.
Well, I'm sorry, what's that?
I said what you was talking about, them refrigerators moving across the room with no apparent support. This happens in places around the world where there's police officers that have been called out, and they're witnessing this going on. You're talking about credible people are actually seeing it going on.
Absolutely. Now, let's take it the next step farther. If we were able to understand the physics behind it, and we have to come to the realization that if it's a real physical effect, Royce, there has to be some physics behind it, even if we don't yet understand it. It's not going to be something that operates contrary to reality. It's going to operate consistently with reality because it does happen. Once we understand that science and we're able to intentionally build technology to focus it in a specific way, technology based on it, why wouldn't we also be able to pick up 200-ton stones and move them in the same way?
Exactly. It's just a matter of understanding the technology that goes into it. And I think it's like you say, or like you're indicating to me, before science can do this and we can get these kind of inventions rolling, they're going to have to look at a new way of our cosmology and our universe and the principles within it because, you kind of make spaghetti without spaghetti sauce, for example.
Yes. And what we have to do, and here's one of the keys. There's a couple different elements that need to be in place for this to happen, Royce. One of the things that needs to be in place is for physics to exhaust, and follow what I'm going to say here, to exhaust their search for material causes for every material effect. In other words, our universe or our physics has advanced enough, and our powers of observation with our instrumentation has become so efficient that we, for the first time in history over the last couple decades, actually have more physical observations of physical effects than we have physical causes to account for them. We have literally run out of material in the universe to explain all the physical effects that we see. This is one of the problems that some philosophical speculators in the field of physics have tried to promote the idea of multiple universes. And this is actually an extension of the materialistic worldview. In other words, we've run out of material causes to explain all the material effects that we observe. That's why we make up hypothetical things like dark matter and supersymmetry, because we're trying to conjure the missing material that we don't have.
Educated guesses?
I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm just saying educated guesses.
Well, yes, and there's nothing wrong with educated guesses. What I'm saying is science needs to have enough of a chance to explore all these things sufficiently so that they ultimately exhaust all the possibilities of finding those material causes. Then their minds will be opened up to something else. And that's one of the things that we're waiting for. I kind of, in a way, call the parts of modern physics the age of denial. You know, the denial.
I can see why.
Yeah, the denial being that there can't possibly be any cause outside of the material for everything that we see. So for some of these things where we have no material left in our universe, what the multiverse does for us is it provides us a new source of material. Since we've run out of it in our own universe and we have to explain this material effect, all we're going to do is borrow some material from this other universe, and poof, we've balanced our equations. You know, what sounds very impressive, sometimes the way physicists present it, wind up being very speculative and tentative when you really look at the details of it. The other thing that we're going to need is a good model of the supernatural, a scientifically reasonably consistent model of the physics of the paranormal that is a scientific theory, not just a theory, not just a hypothesis, not just a metaphysical speculations that we've had plenty of before. Somebody comes up with a new one and publishes a book every month. But a scientific theory. And what a scientific theory does is it makes specific predictions about aspects of reality that are experimentally testable. That based on that prediction, we can conduct or create an experiment, design an experiment, and run it to see if the results are the same as what the theory predicts. And this is what my theory is turning out to be, that others have begun to recognize that this is actually something that can make predictions that are experimentally testable. Now, once we have that, we actually have a model of paranormal, what I call paranormal mechanics, that science cannot long ignore because it actually makes physical predictions that are experimentally testable.
Now that sounds very interesting. And before the show's over though, I do want to mention to you, I mentioned it earlier, you said your work was based on a biblical cosmology that's been missing even though it's been in plain sight. And I'm assuming that what you're talking about is one of the extra biblical works. Can you tell us a little something about the work you're referring to?
Yeah, absolutely. And, like I said, we don't have a whole lot of time to go into great detail. It's all explained in my book. But to explain it kind of just basically and rudimentary, what I wanted to do was not only to have a model that is consistent with science and breaks down the traditional barriers between science and the paranormal or the supernatural, but also breaks down some of the barriers between traditional spiritual perspectives, between religious principles that most people innately, somewhere within ourselves, have an innate sense of it. And so that's one of the things that this model does, too. So, for example, we talk a lot about good and evil in this world. I mean, even people who are atheists understand what good and evil means and can recognize it in our society and label it that way. What if these are creational forces? Think about it for a second. If we have a God, like described in the Bible, a creator like that, he's all-knowing, he's all-seeing, he's infinite. He has no beginning and end. He is unchanging. He is always the same. And so that's something that is completely unlike physical reality. Now let's take a look at the realm of the physical. It's timed. It's spatial. It has a beginning and an end. Everything in it is in constant flux and change. Compounds and materials break down and build up and reform into other compounds. Life lives and dies. Mountains form and break down. Everything exactly the opposite as God is, as we understand God to be. Well, if that's the case, and a creator, an infinite creator, decided to create a finite universe, he couldn't create it within himself. It wouldn't exist. Because infinity cancels out what is finite, physical reality. Or to say it in a religious way, like from the Bible, corruption has no part in incorruption, because the incorruption will instantly dissolve the corruptible into nothing. So where does God get the differences to make a finite universe that's dimensional, that its entire realm is an expression of differences between here and there, or between then and now? Well, the only way that he could do that is have an antithesis, an exact opposite. Now, if we take it a little bit out of the realm of religion and speak of it more generically, and talk about these non-physical or superphysical influences of a positive absolute and a negative absolute, borrowing from Charles Ford, because that's how he looked at it. And we imagine these two absolutes coming in contact, we're going to have a zone of conflict between them. Now, in that zone of conflict, we have differences, and that collision, in my model, gives rise to the pre-material wave functions that eventually unfold into physical space-time. As soon as they decelerate sufficiently to reach the speed of light and below.
That would almost sound like, and again, I'm not, in a technical sense, I'm not a high school grad. I mean, I finished high school, but it was on a, I got work credits to get my diploma. I had some issues back then. But, in other words, I'm not a scientist or a physicist, but I'm a good old boy that listens and has some fairly good comprehension and common sense, I think. What I'm getting out of this is it's almost as though you might say the particles is one part of the forces, and the waves is the other, and the whole act of creation is the interaction between the two of them that brings everything together.
Yes, because what we have is, if we can figure out how to have pre-material wave functions, and we've known, Royce, in mathematics for a long time, in the mathematics of physics, that we do have these abstract numerical values for what we call wave functions, that we know that they're real mathematically, and we know that they somehow give rise to physical reality, but they themselves are not physical. Now, if we can come up with a source for these wave functions, and then come up for a way in which they materialize or unfold into physical reality, which is what my model describes, they unfold into true waves, like it's been talked about in a long time, the music of the spheres, the frequency of the universe, what Nikolai Tesla said is that scientists need to think less about particles and math and think more about waves and frequency and vibration. That this gives us the substance of the universe. Now, think about a snowflake. When we're talking about the substance, we're talking about the ice. But what gives it its form? And now we start talking about Plato's forms and the biblical logos and David Bohm's implicate order, one of the most prominent physicists in the 20th century, talked about implicate order that gave rise, it was not physical, but gave rise to the physical universe of explicate order. We take a look at Edgar Cayce and his idea of akasha, this body of information from which he derived not only the knowledge of illnesses of people far removed from him, but that body of information also contained the cure, because in it was every constituent that every reality emerges from. When we start putting this all together, this model, this super geometrics that I call it, gives us an actual, for the first time, a unified concept where the supernatural, the physical, and the spiritual all together in one single and actually quite simple model.
Yeah, it sounds like it's overall a pretty simple model and like a, one that would really work. Is this model actually being tested scientifically as we speak?
Well, one of the aspects of my work, what's been scientifically tested already, is some of the predictions that it makes by a paranormal phenomenon. Most of the people in this particular field are familiar with a man named David Rountree.
Yes, actually, he's been on my show before. I have a lot of respect for him.
David is very advanced in the field of scientific study of the paranormal. He's kind of, in a league by himself, above what the current state of the art normally is. Mm. And he has conducted some extremely unique experiments, and very cleverly devised experiments, too, far beyond what other people have been doing. And he and I met on an interview in February, and we started comparing notes. And we never even knew each other. This work was completely independent of one another. And so while I'm talking, I'm saying, according to my theory, we should have an emergence point, a spherical expansion of local space. And the things that expansion will be detected will be changes in barometric pressure, changes in temperature, changes in gravitational field. And on three axes, not just the single axes of the gravitational field pointing to the center of the Earth, but their own independent, multi-dimensional, multi-directional gravitational fields emerging. Dilations in time, predictions that EVPs could be recorded in a vacuum or with the diaphragm of the microphone surgically removed because it's an electromagnetic compression wave coming from the interface between the physical content of the local space and the swelling of the space-time bubble interacting with that. And one after the other, David Rountree is telling me, I conducted that experiment and that's what I found. I conducted that experiment and that's what I found. And on and on and on. To a point, Royce, where what David Rountree and myself are collaborating on right now is so far ahead of the current state of the art that not only is it almost like comparing Aristotle to Newton in terms of their physical theory, but it's so far beyond the state of the art that we struggle to get people to understand what the enormity of it is. They understand what we're saying, but they can't grasp the enormity of it, the ramifications of it. Other predictions that it makes. It predicts that in the early universe, that the percentage of gravitational lensing in the universe as to visible mass was lower than the percentage that it is today. It predicts that the early expansion of the universe, which is unexplainable so far, is because the first moments of the Big Bang were superluminal. So it makes predictions that extend far beyond the field of paranormal phenomenon. I'll tell you something, Royce, every time I talk about it with somebody for the first time, it gives me the chills. And I've worked on it for 30 years. It gives me goosebumps. It makes my hair stand on end. We are on the precipice of one of the greatest discoveries that I believe has ever been made.
Well, if you this here continues to test like you are, I would say I don't see how it could be anything other than that. And the like you said, the total ramifications, not only in the changes in history, but in what it offers the future as well as the present. I mean, it's inventions. You think they've been exploding this far? They would really explode.
We're talking about understanding an aspect of reality that has never been grasped before, where we can actually manipulate the very face of reality. And we can actually change and manipulate the very elements that surround us. David and I firmly are convinced that within the next couple years, he and I will be in a position to submit to mainstream science for peer review the first published paper on what we call paranormal mechanics.
You know, I might be wrong about this, and from time to time, not real often, I wouldn't say, I don't recommend other authors and their books on my show, and I usually do it when I think there's a relevance between my guest work and their work. And I got a lady who's been on my show many times. She does a lot of the similar work that you and David do. Her name's Marie D. Jones. You may have heard of her.
Oh, yes, of course. In fact, Marie is personally acquainted with David.
Right. She's also personally acquainted with me, and she's a very nice lady. She's got a book out about the Holy Trinity and the numbers of three that deal with the conscious and superconscious and unconscious, and I might get that wrong. I haven't read that book in over a year, but you kind of get the idea. I think this consciousness is, it plays a role in what you two you and David are working on, in other words.
Yeah. In other words, what has been done before, and there have been some people that have really made some conceptual breakthroughs and made some of these connections, like what you're talking about, like Marie D. Jones's work, this type of thing. There's some things that Barry Taff has come up with many years of investigating. What David and I are doing is we're filling in the blank. We're actually showing for the first time the machine that converts all of these things into reality. In other words, the difference between recognizing the patterns of information on the hard drive and what their relevance is, and actually defining the computer itself that materializes that information into reality.
That is going to be one big, huge product. How much further down the road y'all think y'all are going to be before you're looking at it, getting something public on this? I know you got your book, but you know what I mean by result-wise, in other words.
Well, what we have to do, there's two things that David and I have to do. The first thing is that we need to begin, and we just haven't had the time, to actually sit down and devise new experiments that either he or I haven't thought of before, based on this model. What we've done so far, what he's done and what I've done so far is great, but we need to see how far we can take it, what the limits are of it, and what else we can predict that we can make experiments on and find, predicted findings with it. The other thing we have to do is kind of work out a little bit of the difference in what he and I consider to be a non-local source. And this is where it gets very interesting. I talk about a superphysical overlay on reality. that, contains this body of information, this akasha, this implicate order, and that from which these pre-material wave patterns occur that actually unfold into physical reality. David looks at it in a little bit different way. He looks at this emergence point at paranormal sites as being the mouth of an Einstein-Rosen wormhole bridge. And he sees it as being connected to an adjacent universe, which is comprising strictly of energy and energy patterns and nothing else. So he has more of a materialistic viewpoint of it than I do. What's really weird, Royce, and this is where, again, it kind of gives me goosebumps. If you take his model and you take my model and take the two of them and say, okay, if either one of these were going to express themselves in, like, say, a haunted house, what would that emergent point, that event horizon, look like? And his model and my model draw the exact same picture that predicts the experimental results that he's been getting. It's just so far beyond what's ever come before. But like I said, the frustrating thing is how to say it emphatically enough, passionately enough, emotionally enough, so that the people that are listening start saying, oh my God, this is something really incredible. And so that's been the biggest challenge.
And from what I was hearing you say a few minutes ago, David sees a little bit more materialistic, and yours are spiritualistic. And the one thing that came to my mind when I heard that is that, as I understand it from the Bible, if I remember correctly, spirit is energy.
Well, this is where...
it's a different kind of energy, but I'm saying, are they really that far apart, or is it just a little nuance or semantic that's keeping them apart?
Well, there's, the implications of either one is far-reaching, and that's why we really need to sit down and put our notes together and finally determine a common model that we can both agree upon. The example I would give you is this. The common conception of the wind, for example, just common wind, is that the wind blows. Primitive man, having no knowledge of science, walks out in the field, feels a breeze blow on his face, and comes up with this question in his mind for the first time. Is the wind pushed along or pulled along? The problem is that whether the wind is pushed along or pulled along, everything that we would observe locally around us, Royce, about the wind would be identical for both sources. And this is kind of where David and I are at. But the difference is that the picture that we could draw about the global meteorological system would be much different for one than it is for the other. And what I say is this: my model is unconventional in that it's kind of like if we were to compare it to the wind. What people don't realize, what their conventional thinking doesn't tell them, is that the wind is a function of the movement of air molecules from an area of high pressure to an adjacent area of low pressure. That's what causes a wind. It's scientifically correct to say that a vacuum draws volumes into itself, not the opposite. So the wind is actually pulled along, Royce. The wind sucks. It doesn't blow. Our conventional thinking is completely wrong about what the wind is. But the ramifications to the greater, biosphere is very different for one than it is for the other. Now, to compare this with spirit, David sees spirit as energy. I don't. What I say is this, is that spirit energy is a conflict of terms. It's like saying honest politician. Because energy is physical, but spirit is non-physical. Therefore, they can't be the same thing. And the argument that I give is this: for people who think that spirits persist forever, they can't persist in an energy form. Because when our sun goes supernova, It'll burn up this earth, and it will destroy all ordered structures and all matter and energy, so that everything becomes chaotic. Without an ordered structure, a spirit can't be stored in an energy form that retains its personality, its knowledge, its form. It's completely destroyed. So if you believe that spirits are energy, then you believe that all earthly spirits will die when our sun goes supernova.
That's an interesting concept. I was going to mention to you that it's 9:05, so we've been going for a little over an hour now, and I was going to suggest, since we're riding a little over, if you don't mind, because I hate to hold you up, I've got a couple of more questions I'd like to throw at you real quick. One of them being, now I had that just a minute ago. Let me ask you this one, since it's on my tip of my tongue right now. How would you describe God in your model?
Oh my! Oh my! If we were to look at it from a philosophical or even a pseudo-scientific way, I would have to go back to Aristotle and Newton's prime mover. In other words, God is the prime mover. He is the cause, with a capital C. He is also the source of order, with a capital O. That everything emerges from that. As far as speaking of God as a deity, that's religious. As far as speaking about this order as intelligent, I think that can be derived by the fact that intelligent life exists in the physical. If the order for that intelligent life comes from outside of the physical, that order must be intelligent also. Otherwise, it couldn't have given rise to other intelligences.
Right. And I've got a book uploaded to my server. I got the link to it, but I'd had to get it, called The Kabbalion, you may have heard of, that describes God as mental, which would be intelligent, which ain't really real far from what you're saying. And that leads to the other thing I was going to ask you. If you've got an outside force that creating, like God creating this here reality, and he can't be a part of it, in a technical sense, would he be able to enter this here, or at least parts of them, and interact or sustain it from the inside, even though he's on the outside?
Well, think about it this way. Imagine, how would I say this? Imagine if you were to think of the substance of the universe. Well, think about this implement that people use in a kitchen, sometimes commercially, where it's a French fry maker. They put a potato in the machine. It's got a blade cutter in the front with all kinds of various patterns. They can change the blades. They pull the lever down. The potato gets pushed through into a specific form. Well, imagine that form being physical reality. The resulting potatoes, the French fries. That's materialized reality. The potato is the pre-material substance. And the blade is the order, the akasha, the implicate order, the logos, if you will. Now, if you're the cook, you could certainly change that blade, and you could certainly manipulate that potato or put a carrot in it or whatever. And you could actually directly affect the physical reality that comes out of it without yourself being present in the French fries. You're present before it, but you can control everything that comes out as physical reality.
Okay, let's take this one step further then. Let's just assume, going by your analogy, which, by the way, I love it, but you tempted me, and I hope you forgive me for this. Let's just pretend, on another analogy, that we're that French fry. And we had to, where would we as that French fry become animated or alive if the source was not inside of us?
Well, because the order and source itself is intelligent. Therefore, everything that it makes with that order is going to carry the quality of that intelligence with it. So, for example, I talk about thinking about a deck of cards and thinking about it from a physics point of view or an engineering point of view as a system. And let's say the system is defined by the 52 cards, its 4 suits, and 13 values. You can make up almost an infinite number of game rules. You can deal a dizzying array of different varieties of hands. But in the end, nothing that you come up with will be in contrary to or operate outside of the laws and principles that govern the 52-card deck from which all those subsystems derived. Now let's take a look at the universe itself. We are intelligent creatures. That means the universe gave rise to intelligent creatures. Now, if a system cannot create a subsystem that is contrary to or outside of itself, the way it works, that means that that intelligence has to be built into the universe itself. Otherwise, it could never create a subsystem that's intelligent. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Now, go ahead.
If the universe is built, has intelligence built into it, then the only question is, where did that intelligence come from?
Which the church would tell you it comes from God.
And physicist David Bohm would say it came from implicate order. And
that's pretty much the argument you and David are having, though, isn't it?
Well,
or should I say debate?
Yeah, what David thinks is that the order comes from another universe. But here's where his work and mine differs. He studied specific aspects of specific paranormal phenomena. And he has made a model based on what he found in that blue window. I've made a model that describes the entire building, which his window is only one pane within that building.
Maybe what you two need to do is meet together in person with your notes and writing in front of each other and run experiments at the same time.
We are going to be meeting in October. I've been invited to a private VIP think tank event in November that is from a wealthy patron who wants to bring all these different people together in a conference so that they can interact and exchange with one another. We're going to have Richard Dolan there.
Oh, wow. He's going to be on my show at the end of the month.
All kinds of people that are going to be there. Now, I got on the list because of a personal friend of the wealthy patron. But I'm allowed to bring a guest. And my guest is going to be David Roundtree.
Cool.
And so him and I, when I go up to New Jersey in November, the end of October, I'm going to visit him. And we're going to sit down and have a meeting of our own minds, and then we're going to go together to this convention.
That sounds like a great idea, to give you a chance to compare notes and maybe work out some of your differences before you go. You might even learn something new.
Oh, yeah. I want to see all this equipment he's using. My goodness. He's figured out a way to make a remote paranormal investigative site, like at a haunted house. He's figured out a way to set up controlled laboratory environments to make the findings scientifically relevant and reproducible from one investigative team to another. And I want to see what he's doing, and we have to sit down and convince and compare some notes and devise new experiments that he needs to construct and conduct.
Also, reading your bio, I see here that you got some events coming up. Let's see, in August 2013 in Edinburgh, Scotland, I think. And then you got a think tank and open discussion conference in November. Well, that's 2012. Have you already had that, or?
That's the one I was just talking to you about.
Okay.
But the one in Edinburgh, Scotland, is going to be the largest event of its kind in Europe. And we're going to have Eric von Däniken there. There's a number of other people that are going to be there. It's a very big list. I've been very honored to be invited because people don't. Royce, I've been only on the public scene since November of last year. I've been in the field for less than a year, and to be invited to events like this is just humbling because I'm going to be with people who have been there all the time. Micah Hanks is one of the organizers. He's an advisor on the panel. It's being organized by the Journal of Anomalous Sciences. If you look up everybody, if they want, they can go to Facebook on the internet. Facebook's going to be a little bit better right now. It's called the Spirits, Shadows, and Secrets Symposium. And I'm going to be presenting. I'm going to be speaking there. And David Roundtree is invited, too. He's going to be there, too. And we're also going to get together and make a joint presentation, he and myself. It's just an incredible opportunity and to meet all these different people. And it's very, very exciting, Royce.
I'm at their webpage right now as we speak, and I'm looking at Patty Greer. I'm looking at Mike Hanks. I'm looking at Scott Allen Roberts, Stan Romanek, Lisa Romanek, Chuck Zukowski, Dr. Jeff Meldrum, Chip Coffey, and if you don't know who Chip Coffey is, you bloody well oughta. Robert Cracknell, Dr. Dennis Nicola, and Paula Harris. I'm sorry, I got a little tongue-tied there. These are people that, many of them I know myself. They're great guests and speakers. I think it'd be a good thing for anybody that can make it to go.
Mm-hmm. And, it's going to be a part of a larger festival that's being held in that city at around the same time. So if people are thinking of being a vendor there, or they're thinking of attending, and they need to get lodging and set it up, when I tell you you need to be setting it up now, I'm not kidding with you. And what you're looking at, Royce, is only a partial list. I mean, the invitations only went out about 4 weeks ago.
So a lot of people hadn't even contacted them in yet.
Yep, we're still trying to get George Norrie to come. Von Dyneken's going to be the keynote speaker, obviously. There's a fellow coming in. I can't remember his name. I think he's coming in from Australia. Big event.
Sounds like a pretty huge event. But, listen, I was going to mention, Thomas, that we've rode 15 minutes into the deal, and while we were talking, my kids come home. So I was thinking we could go ahead and do a wrap on this one. You were right earlier when you said that we wouldn't have time to finish. I feel like we could continue on this subject about your book, Behind the Cosmic Veil, for another hour or so and still not get through. I want to tell everybody again real quick to go to his website, www.cosmicveil.com, and that's COSMICVEIL. His name's Thomas Fusco, and he's got information about his book there. He's got articles there, the latest news. He puts his interviews up there, so you can keep up. And folks, pardon me, we've had a lot of rain here in Houston in this last month, and it affected my allergies, and I was off the air for like 3 weeks due to a lost voice, and I'm recovering enough to do my show, but it still kind of hits me every now and then by surprise. So if y'all hear a little something like that and I don't get to mute it when I would like to, just overlook it if you don't mind. And I apologize to you for that, Thomas. I know that doesn't sound very professional, and I couldn't help it.
Hey, it's live. Remember what happened in the 50s when they had live TV? All the crazy things that would happen?
Well, I can never forget what happened on that live radio with Orson Welles.
Oh, my, yes. Oh, that's why they pre-record everything now, because they try to head everything off at the pass. But, hey, you know, it's live, it's real, it's what's happening, and with all of its imperfections and also all of its wonder and charm.
Well, that makes it a little bit more human, too.
You're not kidding.
So, at any rate, though, I have enjoyed this hour. You're a fascinating speaker. I think you do some fascinating work. I'm not into that kind of work. Well, I would be if I had more time and the, set up to do it, but I'm not in that kind of position. But it's a subject that really just fascinates me a lot. I read a lot about it on the Internet. I talk to people like David Roundtree and you and Bernard Hayes, and, well, the list goes on about it. And, I may not be educated from high school, but I learned quite a bit just doing what I do, about it, and I get my own theories as well. But, you actually done the actual work on it, and you got the physical stuff in your house, you got your notes and all of that you can fall back on. And I just think you're, a fantastic guest to have on board, and I'd like to have you come back again in the future, maybe after your think tank.
That would be wonderful, yeah. I would be more than happy to come back, and I really, really appreciate you inviting me on and, allowing me the time to share my ideas with you and your audience. I really do appreciate it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and call a wrap on this one, and I'm going to cut you loose from the conversation, and I'm going to spend about 5 more minutes on the air telling my guests about links that they can visit and my next show and stuff, and reminding them to, bring a friend the next time. So I will send you an email over the next couple of days that's going to have links to where I posted our show on YouTube and on my website. I have a archive on my personal site and on Media Cafe and Daily Motion, so that if you want to share these links, you can.
That sounds great, Royce. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You have a great day and the rest of the weekend and week, actually. And we'll talk at you at a later date. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Now, folks, let me make sure I haven't disconnected myself yet. A nice show to be registering. Just real quick, as I've already mentioned before to folks, I'm catching up shows from during this time that I was off when I lost my voice. This Thursday, 2 days from now, on the 9th, at 8 p.m., I'm going to have Forgotten World's Arthur Patrick Chouinard. That's it, assuming I'm pronouncing it correctly. I'll ask him when I call him. And we're going to be talking about ancient mysteries. And then this Saturday, we're going to have, from the Bodies of the God, Arthur Earl Lee, and it's going to be a return visit for him. And I've already sent out promotionals on it, and I'll be sending out reminders. Don't forget to invite your friends and, tell them what you think of the show, and even tell them what we have coming up. Let them know that, membership is free. You can sign up, and that'll allow you into chat. You can also request to get the newsletter once you get inside your profile. And don't forget to visit my friends over at Supernatural UFO Forums and United Paranormal International .ning. And I got links to them. If you click on the friends link on the left under Other, it's in the main menu area of the navigation menu. And also under that, by 2 links, is radio favorites. If you want to visit my friend Gary Brown at UKPN Radio, or Jim Harold, who has True Stories by the Campfire, and Micah Hanks, who you heard me and Thomas mention of the Gralian Report, and Mark Snyder of Ohio Exopolitics. They're all fantastic hosts, and at least 3 of them have been on my show so far. I think you'll enjoy them. And in the meantime, I'm going to call tonight's show a wrap. You guys take care. Have a fun couple of days. I hope to see you back here for my next show. And hopefully with some friends we can get in chat. And y'all can talk and we can ask some questions. Good night, everybody.
Or paranormal or UFOs. And even within those fields themselves, we know, like in the paranormal, we have people that are specialists in EVPs or parapsychology, where some people specialize in remote viewing. What I wanted to do was look at the whole enchilada. I wanted to look at the entire universe and say, okay, let's find a model that fits that. And then all of these other fields should be able to be at least accessible and recognizable as something that is consistent with the laws and principles by which the greater system is put together. So I've actually come into the study of the paranormal almost like from the back door or from the outside looking in. And it's given me kind of a unique perspective, and it's allowed me to escape some of the stumbling blocks that are caused by traditional thinking and, conventional beliefs in a particular branch.
Yeah, I think those particular beliefs can be big stumbling blocks, especially when you etch them into stone and don't leave room for them to be modified further down the road if need be.
Yeah, again, if we're talking about the paranormal, someone who is an expert, let's say, in EVPs, could discover some very interesting aspects of it. But what their discoveries are may not relate to something like an apparition or some of the other phenomena that are observed at these sites. And so while their model of EVPs may be very compelling, it doesn't accommodate all of the other phenomena that's being observed at these same sites of hauntings. So there is certainly an advantage of taking an overview, kind of looking at the forest from above rather than being,
so it's required in all three if you're going to succeed.
There you go. You got it.
Now, usually as a rule of thumb, Thomas, I like to start the show out with asking my guests what it is that attracted their interest to the field that they're covering, to kind of let my listeners kind of get to know a little something about you.
Well, in terms of what we might look at as, alternative disciplines to the mainstream, which encompasses these kinds of things like paranormal studies, alternative sciences, parapsychology, ufology, those types of things. I think I'm very similar with many other people in that I've had certain personal experiences and observations that indicated to me that there was something more to reality than what was described in the classical physics that I was taught in school. And while I don't talk about the specifics of those experiences on air anymore, anyone who's had any such experiences understands how that kind of begins to change your perception of the world around you. But for me, Royce, unlike a lot of folks that have, in having these experiences, they pursued what I would call more of an experiential development in their pursuits. What it did for me was it created for me a very compelling question. And so for me, that question was, what kind of universe would allow these kinds of things to happen that we call supernatural and paranormal? How could the physical universe be put together that would incorporate these kinds of observations, these kinds of events? So rather than going into a specific study or branch of study like parapsychology, stuck with studying a particular species of tree in a specific location.
Okay. Now, since we are talking about paranormal phenomena, for the listeners' benefit, I think it would probably be a good idea to for you to tell us what you think in your opinion, because I've heard it vary from one person to the next, at least in Yahoo groups, if not a few other places, constitutes paranormal, and that it can also be uniformly applied to other scientific and quantum physical anomalies.
Yeah, Royce, it's a good point because let's face it, at the heart of our understanding about the way the universe is put together is our discipline that we call science. And if we're going to really come up with a view of everything, with an all-encompassing concept of some sort, we can't continue to have this kind of a position where science and, paranormal or supernatural studies are at odds. So we have to find ways of reconciling them. And for me, I had to come up with very early on in my work with a definition of paranormal phenomenon that was not only very specific and very exacting, but also that was consistent with established physics. And so what I ultimately came up with is my definition of what is paranormal is any physical observation that has a physical effect and that interacts with its surroundings physically. For example, you can't hear a disembodied voice unless you actually have a physical interaction with that cause that's compressing airwaves that are vibrating your eardrums so that you hear a sound. These are physically observable effects that physically interact with their environments. Like normal phenomena, what makes them paranormal is that there is no locally positioned direct physical cause connected to the effect. Okay.
Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me tonight is Thomas Fusco, and he's got a new book out called Behind the Cosmic Veil. And from what I've studied in his email that he sent me with all the information and on his website, this deals a lot with where science, spirituality, religion, paranormal, supernatural, where it all meets, and it's really a uniformed or unified field of everything for all of creation that this man has come up with. And as I understand it, he has found some confirmation in rare biblical scripture or old biblical scripture that I'm assuming, and I could be wrong, it's not part of the actual canon itself, and we can get him to clarify that in a minute. But this is really a subject that I've read a lot of articles about online, and I know a lot of people, pardon me, folks, David Wilcox has actually got his own one that deals with consciousness, and I don't know if Thomas's is similar to that or not until we start talking, but there's other ones as well. So it's really a very fascinating subject, and it's one that me personally, I think I'd like to learn more about and I'd like to cover, because who doesn't want to know how reality works? Well, maybe there are some that don't, but I'm not on that list. So Thomas, how are you doing today?
Oh, very good. How about yourself?
Oh, I'm doing just great, Thompson. I want to thank you for coming on the air, and I also want to thank you for contacting me a second time when I didn't receive your first email. I have no idea what happened, but I would have never known you were out there if you hadn't contacted me again, so I want to thank you for that.
Well, thanks for having me on the show. And, yes, persistence is a salesman's virtue.
I'll give you that one. I spent 15 years in sales management and marketing.
So, for example, in a normal voice, we have this vibration of the air column, a compression wave that recorders or our eardrums pick up, translate into sound. In a normal voice, the local physically connected cause is our vocal cords. They are directly in contact with the air column that is vibrating. In a paranormal voice or disembodied voice, we have the effect, We have the vibration of the airwaves. We have our ears doing everything just like a normal voice, except that there's no local set of vocal cords. There is no physical, locally connected cause to the effect. And so this brings us into a scientific definition that is already existing. It's called non-local causality or non-locality. It is an effect with no local physical cause. Now, we observe a lot of things in science that also are mysterious because they're non-local effects. We see a lot of it in quantum physics. We still see this in the dual slit experiment, which we might talk about a little later. We also see it in certain aspects of gravity. So here we have a definition where we can combine a number of different elements from various disciplines under the same scientifically consistent, logical, and workable, functional definition.
Right. And, I mean, there's a lot of things that would, fall under this, and some of them are, readily admitted by science and other ones are not. Like, for example, free energy would not be admitted by science even though dark matter is.
Well, you've got a point there. even though with dark matter, there's a public persona, a public presentation from the scientific community as to what image they're projecting with that particular idea. But internally, they are fully aware that that concept is completely hypothetical, and they have no stitch of physical evidence for it.